Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
Welcome in to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. No Morgan today, just me, Rick. We're splitting up the shows this week since I'm moving. I'm literally currently sitting in an empty room in an empty apartment. But you got to do what you got to do, right? So got to get those shows out to you guys. We're getting drafting season. We're approaching drafting season. I think we're kind of in drafting season, to be honest, especially by the time this comes out. So definitely got to get these shows out to you for some advice. So we got a lot to cover in this episode, a lot. We're going to be talking about 20 total players. We got my top 10 tight ends and top 10 quarterbacks. And now, before we get started, I do want to say things will change with projections. They do every year. And then little things throughout the summer, maybe D-Hop signs somewhere that can affect the quarterback or Dalvin Cook. That could also affect tight ends. So, and then little reports from camps as well. So there'll be some changes. There always is. But this is the base. This is the foundation. These are the top 10 guys that I like at the tight end position and quarterback position. So before we get started, make sure you do the following. Check out our website at thefantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Like us on Facebook. Our Twitter is the FF Champs. Instagram, the Fantasy Champions. Facebook, facebook.com/thefantasychamps. TikTok at the FF Champs. And if you're listening to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platforms, please leave a review and share it with your friends. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, like and leave a comment, either roasting me or Morgan. He loves that. So, or just drop your top 10 list. Where did we get it right? Where did we get it wrong? What would you change? What do you agree with? So I'd love to hear your thoughts. So without further ado, we got a lot of players to talk about. So let's get started. We're going to start with tight ends first. So if you just want to hear quarterbacks, I want to skim through this, but we're going to start off with my top 10 tight ends as of today. And I'm recording this at the end of noon. So things will change probably at the end of July after my projections. Again, I'll probably have a couple changes, but as of now, this is the basis, the foundation, and this is what I got. So number 10, I'm going to go with Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram is around, I've seen 8 or 9 on a lot of lists. On Underdog, I think he's getting drafted as the 8th tight end. I don't hate that. I don't draft him typically a lot. I've got a couple shares of him because I'm a maniac and I just do a lot of best ball drafts and I want variety. And he's good. I feel okay about him. He's still got Trevor Lawrence. Last year he was tight end 5 in PPR. Had a great season. I think some of that was that he was fully healthy, played a full season, which is historically kind of rare for Evan Ingram. I don't see that happening next year. I could see an injury out of him. Also, it's a big Calvin Ridley effect, right? So with Calvin Ridley coming in, I personally think he's going to take the most targets on the team. So there's not a whole ton of vacated targets. Somebody's going to have to take a hit. I think Christian Kirk takes a small hit, and Evan Ingram might take a small hit as well. Unless Trevor Lawrence just has a monster season, which is very, very possible, in which case you want every Jaguar possible. You want Christian Kirk, you want Calvin Ridley, you want Evan Ingram. And I do think that is a possibility that Trevor Lawrence has a monster season. If you want to stack Lawrence with Evan Ingram, totally be my guest. I would not be opposed to that. I think after Evan Ingram, there's a real drop. So if you want to get those top 10 guys, it would be smart because after Evan Ingram, it does kind of drop off for me. So even though I do have him at 10th, he's comfortably there at 10th. No one's really pushing him out of that top 10. So number 9, I have David Njoku. And David Njoku, he also had a pretty good year last year when he was healthy. Kind of was up and down, especially, Deshaun Watson being in there. He was up and down as well. He ended up missing 2 games and was still the tight end 10 in PPR. So that's pretty solid. And I do have him one spot higher than Evan Ingram, partly because I think with David Njoku playing a full season, with Deshaun Watson now with a full offseason under his belt, I do expect Watson to play better next year, which should lead to Njoku playing better next year. And they did add Elijah Moore, who I think could have a solid season as well. But I think Njoku's probably that second option in that offense. And if Deshaun Watson can play anything like he was in Houston, Njoku's going to have a really good year. And he was already decent last year with Jacoby Brissett. So, and he had a couple good games when Watson came back. He had an 18-point week with Watson, and then week 18 he had a 14-point week. So again, a little inconsistent though. He had 3, 3, and 5 as well through weeks 15 through 17. So a little inconsistent, but again, Njoku missed 2 games. Actually, I believe he missed 3 games looking on this list, and was still able to finish as the tight end 10 in PPR, which is pretty good. His points per game were really solid, had higher than a lot of the guys that finished ahead of him outside of the top 5 guys. So pretty solid season. And I think it's, if you want to nitpick at this and say you'd rather Evan Ingram, I'm not going to argue that. I think they're both very, very similar. Number 8, I got Pat Freiermuth, who I think is also in this tier of tight ends with Ingram and Njoku, but I have Freiermuth as ranked the highest. And I think Morgan would agree with me here. I mean, he's a big Muth guy, but he's just really solid. Last year, he was tight end 8, right? He finishes the tight end 8. He missed 2 games, I believe. Or no, he missed 1 game. 2 games with 0 fantasy points is kind of tough. But he was very, very consistent last year. He had a large stretch of games where he was getting double-digit fantasy points every single week that he was in the lineup. Finished as the tight end 8 in 16 games played. The big thing with Freiermuth, and I think the reason I have him higher than Njoku and Evan Ingram, is he only had 2 touchdowns last year. We saw this with Cole Kmet. And Cole Kmet statistically ended up having a good season. It was kind of inconsistent, but he did finish as the tight end 8. But what we told you last offseason was Cole Kmet had a pretty good year. The previous year, he just didn't have any touchdowns. And it's hard to repeat that even in a poor offense. And Cole Kmet finished the year with, I want to say, like 5 or 6 touchdowns, finished as the tight end 8. So I think Freiermuth was able to finish as the tight end 8 last year with only 2 touchdowns. It's really, really impressive. I'm not saying the Steelers offense is going to be elite. I'm not saying Kenny Pickett's throwing 40 touchdowns or anything like that. But if the Steelers just have minimal improvement on the offensive side, if Kenny Pickett can just have a solid, slight year 2 jump, should lead to good things for Freiermuth, who in that offense, when he's out there, feels like he's probably the number 2, maybe 3 option on a team that throws the ball a decent amount. And I think more touchdowns are definitely coming in. And if he doesn't, I mean, he still had a solid year last year with only 2 touchdowns. So that's why I got Freiermuth at 8 ahead of Njoku and Ingram. I think his ceiling is also pretty high entering his 3rd year in the league. It's going to be a matter of fact it's going to just come up to Kenny Pickett, though. If he sucks, then his ceiling is what it is. But if he has a good year, Pat Freiermuth could have a really, really good year. So to keep moving forward here, we got number 7. I got Darren Waller. He's kind of an interesting player here, a little bit of a wild card. But I do like him. I do like the player. He's been really, really hurt the last 2 years. Hasn't seen a lot of playing time. And I think it's scaring a lot of people off, and it should, because you have a lot of injuries. I think he's going to be 31 this season when it's coming up, so he's getting older. There's a lot of question marks with him. He's on a new team with the Giants, a team that did not have a good passing offense last year. A lot of question marks and a lot of reasons to be concerned. At the same time, he has a very, very high ceiling for being the tight end 7. He could finish, I think, as high as the tight end 2. And depending on if you think the Travis Kelce cliff is coming, maybe even tight end 1. He's got that kind of potential with the Giants. Even though the Giants offense has been poor passing the ball wise, this is probably the most weapons that Daniel Jones has had in a while with Darren Waller. And Waller comes into it as probably on paper their number 1 passing option. I expect them to feed him the ball. And if he is healthy, I expect him to get a lot of targets in this offense. How many touchdowns is he going to get? How efficient is he going to be? Those are questions that are unanswered, right? And is he going to stay healthy? Another unanswered question. But his ceiling is there, and I think that's why, which for an older guy is kind of weird. But That's why I have him at 7, and I've been drafting him a decent amount, especially in best ball, because I know if he does hit, it's going to be a home run. But draft him at your own concern. I do think he is risky. Thankfully, he's going kind of late in drafts. I want to say he's like a 7th, 8th round pick. So in that range, I feel pretty good about it. If he starts climbing up boards and camp reports go crazy, I might back off on Waller a bit. But as of right now, at his current asking price, I like it. It's a high risk, high reward type of player. You got to just hope he stays healthy. But I think if he does, he will get a lot of targets in that Giants offense. And then to keep pushing forward here on this list, I got number 6, Dallas Goedert. Goddard was really solid last year when he was on the field. I want to say he finished as the tight end 12, but he was at 11.8 points per game, which was 5th among tight ends. So when he was out there, he was a top 5 tight end last year. So you could honestly say this could be a value here, putting him at number 6. But and some people even have him higher, some people have him lower. He's kind of, a lot of people are a little confused on what to do with him, but he did finish as the tight end 12, missing 5 games last year, which is really impressive. If you go back and just look at his week-to-week stats, he was consistently really good when he was on the field. I think the problem with Goddard, I don't know what his ceiling is. Like, I think what he did last year feels like his ceiling in that Eagles offense that is really, really good. But they have A.J. Brown, they have Devontae Smith, and they're not a team that's going to throw the ball 700 times, right? Or close to that, because Hurts is going to run the ball. They like to run the ball with the running backs. So it's kind of a limited ceiling for Goddard unless he has like a crazy touchdown year, which could be the case. He only had 3 touchdowns last year, so you could see an increase on him. He's somebody who's not going to be a sexy pick. A lot of people, he might fall in your drafts because of that, because people are like, I'm not trying to draft Dallas Goedert in the 6th round. He ends up falling. Could be a really, really good late round value. Definitely have him over Waller for the consistency last year. I don't think the injury concern is too much looking at his history. He's been relatively healthy. He did miss some time in 2020 as well. But yeah, I think Goddard's pretty good. He's pushing top 5, and I think there's a real argument to have him top 5. And could be a real steal in drafts because, again, not really a sexy name, but he is very, very consistent. Number 5, a lot of people are going to have this guy lower than this. Some people might even have him higher. It's a very controversial player. I'm going to go with Kyle Pitts, and I know a lot of people listening are probably on the first part where you don't want to draft him. And I understand. I get it. I would get avoiding him as well. But an underdog, and if you do DraftKings on best ball, which I do as well sometimes, he's not a bad value going in the same range as Darren Waller and Dallas Goedert. In a lot of cases, I've even seen Dallas Goedert get drafted ahead of him. And I do think they're very close when ranking them, and they could flip-flop as the offseason goes along. But I feel like we're just so quick to forget that Kyle Pitts is one of the best prospect tight ends of all time, if not the best. He was, I believe, the 4th overall pick, I want to say, in the 2020 NFL draft, 2021 NFL draft, which is crazy for a tight end. And then, a lot of people said, well, he's done nothing in the NFL. He's been disappointing. His rookie year, he was the tight end 6 with 1 touchdown. He had a 1,000-yard receiving season as a rookie. The dude is a freak. He's a superstar tight end in the making. He had a bad year too, and disappointing a lot of people. And taking him in the 3rd round, we told you last year that was a disaster with Marcus Mariota as the quarterback anyway. He also had some injuries. It just was not good. This year, do I like Desmond Ridder? I think he's an upgrade over Mariota. Honestly, I don't really know. I'm not that high on Ridder. Mariota was really, really bad last year. I think Ridder can be a slight upgrade. But here's the thing. The year before that, they didn't have good quarterback play either, and he was still a 1,000-yard receiver. I think a healthy Kyle Pitts, even if Ridder is kind of mid, which I think he will be, should still have a bounce-back season. He's too good of a player to not have a bounce-back season. And he still showed flashes last year. Again, he still showed flashes last year. I think he's still going to have a ridiculous target share, which he did at times last year, not as high as you would expect. But the value is much better now. You're not looking at a third-round pick who's going to destroy your roster if he doesn't have a good year. You're looking at a guy who's like a sixth-round pick who's now a complementary piece on your team that has, similar to Darren Waller, I think, a very high ceiling and has a lot of talent. The dude is ridiculously talented, and I expect him to have a good year. It might be a bust. It might. And I get why people would kind of want to avoid him. But I will choose the talented player over the guys who I don't know if are as talented. Number 4, George Kittle. George Kittle, I feel like every single year is like 3 or 4. Every single year he has really good moments, then kind of disappoints. But last year, the dude was a machine. It's an absolute machine. He missed the first 2 games of the season and still finished as the tight end 3 in PPR. He was a touchdown machine the end of the season. He was arguably a league winner. Week 15, 25. Week 16, 30. Week 17, 12. That was your playoff week most likely, and he absolutely dominated. He definitely at least got you the chip, maybe helped you win one. Kittle just historically, the only reason I have him at 4, we know his injury history, right? He's always injured. Last year, he had a career high in touchdowns as well. I don't know if he's going to repeat the season he did last year with all the weapons in San Francisco as well. We don't even know what their quarterback situation is. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I'm always a fan of George Kittle. He's going as the 4th tight end as well. I would be willing to draft him there in like the 4th, 5th round. He can win you leagues. He did it last year. He can win you weeks, that's for sure. He's a guy who can get you 30 points in the tight end position, which there's not many guys in the league that can do that. There's maybe like 2 or 3 other guys in the league that you can look at and say he can get me 30 points in a week that I needed. And Kittle's one of those guys. So obviously, I think you can make the argument for even putting him higher. I think you can make the argument for putting him as high as number 2, honestly, which is why I'm drafting him a lot, even though I have him at number 4, because he's going as the 4th guy. So the guys ahead of him are getting drafted ahead of him. So I'm okay with taking him as the 4th tight end by all means, because I think they're very, very close. 4, 3, and 2 at the tight end position are all very, very close. And I think where they get drafted does influence how I draft them. And I think Kittle is he's so close to being higher in this list. I just can't do it because I expect him to miss like 3 or 4 games at least every single year. While these other guys, you don't necessarily expect that. So number 3, a guy who has not grown on me because I've always been high on him, but he's kind of, he got traded last year, the trade deadline. I was a little unsure of how that would work out, and ended up being a fantastic deal for him, and that is TJ Hawkinson of the Minnesota Vikings, the tight end 2 last year in PPR. He was a PPR machine. He was getting consistently targeted at a high level at Minnesota. He was very consistent. He had a stretch there, actually pretty much his entire time minus week 18, which chances are you might not even play. He had 8 points, 11, 16, 11, 8, 15, 7, 10, 8, 35, and 12. So he threw that big 35 game in there to really help out his numbers. But you take that out, he's still consistently getting you around double digits or more fantasy points in that 8 to 16 range, right? Which is what you want out of your tight end with the occasional big week. He's perfect in Minnesota. He's their number 2 option behind Jefferson now with Thielen gone. I think Addison could grow into that role, but I think at least for the first part of the season, Hawkinson will stay that number 2, and he might stay the number 2 option the whole season in a team that passes the football a lot with Kevin O'Connell head coach. So Hawk is great, man. He's great. He's another guy I'm drafting a lot. I honestly am drafting the guys who are 4 and 3 more than the guy at 2. Because again, I think they're all in the same tier. They're all very close, and they could end up switching around. But Hawk's a great pick. I think he's somebody that, again, people are scared of because they're like, I haven't seen it before last year, and he's not really. I don't know if you want to draft him as like the 3rd tight end off the board, but it is worth it, especially if he can play like he did last year in Minnesota. So number 2, a guy who I'm not drafting a lot, yet I have him number 2 is Mark Andrews. And that's not fully intentional. I have tried to draft him a couple times, but he just went and in the 3rd round. And I don't know if I'm getting Kittle in the 5th and I'm getting Hawk in the 4th. I don't really feel the need to draft Mark Andrews in the 3rd. If they were all there in the 5th round, I would probably draft Mark Andrews first. But again, these guys are all so close. So I have Mark Andrews at 2. He's just been really, really good. Last year, he did kind of fall off, but it was because of the Lamar Jackson injury. Before the Lamar Jackson injury, the dude was on a tear to start the season. The first 6 weeks of the year, 10, 25, 28, 3, 22, 23. Ridiculous numbers. And then without Lamar, he was kind of iffy and wasn't quite to that level. But he still finished as a tight end 4 last year in 15 games. But you look at the year before that, he was the tight end 1. I don't know if the tight end 1 is going to happen again with Odell there and Zay Flowers. Hopefully Rashad Bateman and Odell stay healthy. But on the other side to that coin is the Ravens are expected to throw the ball more this year, so maybe it evens out for him. Maybe those other guys actually help Andrews because the defense has to focus on Zay Flowers more. The defense has to focus on Odell Beckham, and it could open up opportunities for Mark Andrews. So there's some pros and cons with him. There's some question marks. But considering just the history of the player, what we know he's capable of with Lamar Jackson, a healthy Lamar Jackson, I got to put him at number 2 here. But all very close. Andrews, Kittle, Hawk, all very close. I think you could pick either one of those guys. And again, I'm probably drafting more of Kittle and Hawk just based on where they're going in the draft. And then number 1, pretty obvious, it's Travis Kelce. And I kind of called for a cliff last year. I was dead wrong. He ended up having arguably his best season yet as the tight end 1. He had 18 points per game, which is just ridiculous. Ridiculous. I mean, that's like a top 5 receiver. And he won a lot of leagues. Does that mean I'm drafting a lot of him again this year? Am I going to die on the hill and be Max Kellerman where the cliff is coming? Partly. I'm not saying that the cliff is coming this year because Kansas City, who else? It's Tony if he's healthy. Sky Moore, can he take the jump? Rice is a rookie. MVS, there's just not a lot there at receiver. So Kelce is the wide receiver 1. He is on that team. Am I taking him in the top 5? No, I'm just not. I'm sorry. I know the positional value and all that, but I'd rather just wait on one of the other guys I talked about before. Because Kelce will need to do what he did last year to even be kind of worth the 5th overall pick. And even then, not really. Because he was, I believe, if you compare him to wide receivers, let's check right now. He would have been the wide receiver 5. So if you would have taken him behind Diggs, Adams, Tyreek Hill, Jefferson, then you could make the argument he'd be worth it. So if he's at the end of the 1st round, you can make the argument that he is worth it there. But then you have to expect him to have the same year he did last year, which I would be concerned about. I'm not saying the cliff. I'm not going to go that far, but I will say maybe a slight decrease in face points. I still have him as the tight end 1. I have drafted him, but I'm just not excited about taking him in the top 5 or even like the top 7. To be honest, even the top 10. I'm really just not excited about taking a tight end that high. Even if he is the wide receiver 1. A lot of people love him, and he's very consistent the last couple of years. If you drafted him, it's really helped out your teams. But the dude is, I want to say 35, going to be 35. Like, I'm not saying a cliff, but maybe just a slight decrease. A slight decrease. He's going to be 34. Maybe exaggerate a little bit. But still, that's getting up there. It is getting up there for the NFL tight end. So there is my tight ends, my top 10 tight ends. Let me know how you feel about that. And if you're here for the quarterbacks and you skipped ahead, you're right here. So let's talk about the top 10 quarterbacks. And again, this list could change. I struggled even with number 10. I was thinking about a couple guys here, but I landed with Dak Prescott. And Dak is not somebody I'm like thrilled to draft. And I think there's a couple other guys that you could make the argument here for. I was thinking about Tua. I was thinking about even Aaron Rodgers potentially, but I landed on Dak because he has been in the past really solid. In 2019, he was the quarterback 2 in the NFL. had a really good year, almost 5,000 yards passing. Then he tore his ACL, came back from the ACL, and he was tight end or quarterback 8, right? So that's a good season. Threw 37 touchdowns, had a really good year. And then last year just had a really down year. And he did have some injuries, but even before the injuries, he was not playing at like a super high level. I guess he got injured week 1, so it was just one game. But still, he wasn't great last year. 15 interceptions, only 23 touchdowns, 2,800 yards. Again, he did miss some time, so those numbers would have been inflated. But just not a great year. He still managed to finish as the QB 18, though. But the reason I have Dak there at 10, I think we've seen what he can do in the past. That Dallas team is still loaded. They added Brandon Cooks. You got Michael Gallup coming off an ACL, a year removed from that injury, so he should be better. You got CeeDee Lamb. You still got Tony Pollard. They might bring Zeke back. The offensive line is decent enough. I feel like there's just a lot of things there where a healthy Dak Prescott, at worst, you're getting like the QB 12. At worst. And best case scenario, he's like top 8, top 7. So I feel like Dak at 10 is a pretty good spot for him. I feel probably the most comfortable outside the top 9. But there is a little bit of a tier breaker for me. Although maybe after Dak, maybe there's one more guy in Dak's tier that we'll talk about. But yeah, I got Dak at 10. Not crazy about him, but I do think of all the guys behind him that I was debating about, I feel most comfortable with drafting Dak Prescott. Number 9, I have Deshaun Watson, and I talked about earlier when I was talking about David Njoku that I do expect Watson to have a slightly better year this year, and I think that's going to happen. And we look at Deshaun Watson last year, he was obviously not good at all. But again, he hadn't played football in almost 2 years, right? So now with a full offseason in the books and some football behind, or some football that he was able to play last year, some more preseason action, just as he gets his legs back under him, I expect him to be good. Outside of his rookie year, right? 2017 was his rookie year, so we don't really count that. And he still had a decent year, his rookie year. Only 7 games played and threw 19 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. That's actually really good. And then 2018, 2019, 2020, he was a top 5 fantasy quarterback. He was number 5 each year. So I'm not expecting top 5 out of Deshaun Watson. But the dude is a running quarterback. And we talk about it on the show with running quarterbacks. We love running quarterbacks. He had 500 yards, 400 yards, 400 yards each of those 3 seasons before the suspension. Last year, in just 6 games, he had 175 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Paced out, just quick math in my head, that's around 350-ish yards rushing with like 3 rushing touchdowns. And I think he could get about 400 rushing yards with about 4 rushing touchdowns. And if he does that and has a good passing season like he has in the past, if he just plays close to what he has in the past, it isn't even exactly what he would be, because then he would be a top 5 quarterback. But if he just plays close, he's going to be worth it as the QB9. He's the guy I'm drafting a lot of. I prefer the top 8 guys for sure, and that's the reason they're ahead of him. But if I miss out on one of the guys I want, I'm okay with waiting a round or 2 extra and getting Deshaun Watson, who I think win healthy. And if he, again, just plays back to what he was, close, 80% of what he used to be, he's going to be worth it for sure. A little risky because there's always that chance that he isn't the same quarterback as he used to be, and he sucks. And Cleveland made a really, 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 really bad financial decision if that happens. But you take that risk, but in like I want to say 8th or 9th round, where he's going, it is a risk, but it's not like a massive risk. It's not one that could ruin your team. And I think the reward is high enough where it is worth it. So those are those guys. Now we get to the top 8. I want to say the top 8 this year feels better than ever going into a year. I feel really good about all 8 of these guys. Historically speaking, we've talked about drafting quarterbacks late, streaming quarterbacks. This year, I don't really want to do that. I think I want to get one of these top 8 guys, or maybe 9 with Deshaun Watson. Those are kind of my targets. And we'll start off with number 8, Trevor Lawrence, a guy who sneaky MVP candidate going into year 3. He has Calvin Ridley. Let's just talk about last year for a second. He was the QB8 last year. Okay, so he had a good season last year. He has a rushing floor, almost 300 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 4,100 yards. Very, very good season. Quarterback 8. Now you're going into year 3. He's considered one of the best prospects since Andrew Luck, the best prospect since Andrew Luck, one of the best since Peyton Manning, one of the best since John Elway. He's in that S tier of quarterback prospects coming out. He's going into year 3, second year with Doug Peterson. Gets Calvin Ridley on his team. The dude I could easily see him throwing like 35-ish touchdowns, close to 5,000 yards, 300 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, and is like the QB 2 or 3. Like I could see that being a possibility. The dude has all the potential in the world. And to be honest, I'm just putting him at QB 8 because the other guys have either higher ceilings or we've just seen them consistently be top 5 guys, and it's hard to just put them any lower. But Trevor Lawrence is the QB8, I think is a great value. And I would be willing to draft him, which I think want to say 6th round. I think that's really solid. And I don't blame you for putting him any higher if you do. But I couldn't really do that just because of the guys ahead of him. But still love Trevor Lawrence. Number 7, I got Justin Herbert. Herbert's a guy that some people might be out on because he burned them last year, and I do get that. He had a very disappointing year last year, but he was working with some Walmart guys at wide receiver. He had nobody for a chunk of the season. Keenan Allen was hurt. Mike Williams was hurt. Even Josh Palmer was hurt. He had like 2 or 3 games where he had his 4th wide receiver on the team. DeAndre Carter was his wide receiver 1. So he was just all over the place. They also lost their right tackle, Rashawn Slater, last year in the beginning of the season with a torn ACL. So the offensive line wasn't that good. The play calling wasn't that good. It was actually a miracle that he finished as the QB11 with all that going on. He still threw 4,700 yards. Still. Now you get hopefully a healthier Keenan Allen, which is always, a risk. Hopefully a healthier Mike Williams, also always risk. But the 2 bigger things is you get Quentin Johnston in the 1st round to hopefully help out when those guys get hurt. And you get Kellen Moore as a play caller who should be an upgrade. And we just saw in 2021 him being the QB2, 5,000 yards, 38 touchdowns. I think he can definitely go back to that. And if not, you do at least expect an upgrade. His first 2 years, he had a combined 8 rushing touchdowns. Last year, 0 rushing touchdowns. So there's a lot of little things that went into last year. They ran the ball a lot on the goal line. I think just positive regression is a lock for Justin Herbert. And he's a guy that you expect to probably lead the NFL in passing yards or be up there. And if he can get that positive regression in touchdowns, like I definitely expect him to do, the dude, again, could easily finish as the QB2. I will say this about all these guys. The quarterback position, you want to draft one of the top 8 guys. If you're going to take anything away from this show, take that away. I like Justin Herbert. Would easily be glad with him. And I want to say he's 5th or 6th round pick. Not a bad spot either. Next up, I got Joe Burrow at number 6, and some people might be a little shocked at that, might want to have him higher. He had a great year last year. He was the QB4. But Burrow, to me, you could make the argument, has a lower ceiling than some of these other guys. His floor is massively high. He's going to be a top, QB 6 or 7, right? Which is why I'm still very, very good with drafting him. And I could even see if he wanted to put him higher than the next guy. Absolutely understand that because his floor is higher. But he just doesn't run the ball a lot. Last year was a career high in rushing for him, 5 touchdowns, 259 yards. I don't know if that happens again. But he is going to throw like 35 touchdowns, 4,500 yards. He's Joe Cool. You're guaranteed a very, very good quarterback if you draft Joe Burrow. So again, who am I to tell you not to draft Joe Burrow if you feel like he should be higher on this list? I'm very fine with that. You're very good with drafting Joe Burrow. Just don't draft him crazy high. But if you want to draft him and if he falls a little bit, I think he's going like 4th round, which to me is like a little rich. But if he's like a 5th round pick in the same tier as like Herbert, sure, go for it. Absolutely. He's guaranteed to be a very good quarterback. I don't see a scenario outside of injury where Burrow isn't like a top 6 guy, top 6 or 7. I'll say 7. But maybe top 8 because Trevor Lawrence. But that's like worst case scenario, right? So Burrow is a great pick. I just have him a little lower because I think the top 5 to me all could finish as the QB1. I don't really see Joe Burrow finishing as QB1. He would have to have a Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers type pocket passing season, which is, I guess, possible. I just don't see that as a likely scenario, as the top 5 guys have a more likely scenario. Number 5, this guy has crazy upside, and I think some people would rather take Joe Burrow or Herbert or even Trevor Lawrence over him. But I have him at number 5 just because his upside is through the roof, and that is Justin Fields. Justin Fields is a machine. We saw what he did last year on the ground. And again, for fantasy, that is amazing. We saw what Jalen Hurts did in his year 3 jump. I think Justin Fields is capable of that. They got him DJ Moore. They've improved the offensive line. I mean, his weapons now, if Chase Claypool is somewhat decent, you got Mooney, Claypool, and DJ Moore, Cole Kmet. Pretty good foursome right there of weapons. Not to mention the fact of his rushing, which I guess we'll talk about now. Historically great rushing season, 1,100 yards, 8 rushing touchdowns. The only guy I think is similar in the league is maybe Lamar Jackson, maybe Jalen Hurts, but I think Fields is a better rusher than Jalen Hurts. If his passing just can improve slightly, he was QB7 last year. And this is the other thing that people I don't think realize. Because yes, his floor is lower than like a Burrow or maybe even a Herbert or Fields or Lawrence. But last year with crappy passing numbers, he was the QB7 because of his rushing. 1,100 yards, 8 rushing touchdowns. Is he going to rush for 1,000 yards again? I don't think so. I would expect a slight decrease, but he's still the best rushing quarterback in the NFL outside of Lamar Jackson, in my opinion. And if he can improve his passing numbers, the sky's the limit. This dude could win MVP. This dude could be a top 3 fantasy quarterback easily if he gets those passing numbers up. Is the floor low? Yes. Could he be a bust? Absolutely. I could see that happening. But with his ceiling, it is a risk I'm absolutely willing to take. And in a lot of drafts, he's going lower than Joe Burrow. I've seen drafts where he falls even around lower than where he's supposed to go because people are worried about Fields as a quarterback on the field, and I do understand, but you got to draft him, man. His ceiling is unbelievable. So yeah, this could be honestly the best time to draft him potentially if he goes off. Number 4, I got Lamar Jackson, and I was even tempted maybe Fields ahead of Lamar, but I go with Lamar. He's proven he should be healthy this year. Injuries have been concerned in the past, but I don't expect him to get like 170, 60 rushing attempts like he did his second year in the league when he finished QB1. But I expect him to have more pass attempts. I think he gets a career high in that this year with Odell, with Zay Flowers. I think they got an improvement in offensive coordinator. And this is a guy, again, another guy that you're saying this, but he's a guy who could win MVP. We saw what he did even in the beginning of last year. First 3 weeks, 21, 42, 41. Like he came out the gate hot last year. And it just shows what he can do. He has been the QB1 in the past. He has now improved weapons, improved offense coordinator. And when I say improved weapons, I mean like significantly. Last year, you got to remember Bateman was hurt. They didn't have Odell. They didn't have Zay Flowers. It was like Devin Duvernay and just a whole bunch of random guys. Sammy Watkins, I believe, for a while. So now you're getting Odell, who isn't the same player, but I think is still solid wide receiver 2 or 3. You got Zay Flowers, who I think is a really, really shifty, athletic, talented young receiver. You got a healthy Rashad Bateman going into year 3. You got Mark Andrews. The weapons are there. Hopefully the offensive coordinator is there and improved. And they've already talked about throwing the ball more, right? That's been a big theme in their offseason in OTAs and everything. Is throwing the ball more. And I think they will. That to go with his rushing, I'll take Lamar Jackson at number 4. And then number 3, now we're getting to the big guys. Any one of these guys can finish as the QB1. They were so close to each other last year. And number 3 might be a little surprising to you. It's Patrick Mahomes. The QB1 last year, Patrick Mahomes. I have it number 3. And now the reason I'll say this, a couple quick things. One, I don't know if the weapons are going to stay healthy and be great for him. I know that wasn't really a problem last year, but they did lose Juju, so you're losing a consistent slot guy who is probably going to be replaced by Sky Moore, but we just don't know about Sky Moore. Tony, can he stay healthy? So there's some questions there. Obviously not big concerns because he's still Patrick Mahomes, but just in terms of finishing as the QB1, could be in question there. And then it's just historically speaking, it's rare for a guy to finish as QB1 back-to-back seasons. I want to say Josh Allen did it, but it's usually pretty rare. He's finished as QB1 this year, and then in 2018 he was QB1 again. But in between that, he was QB4, QB7. So I have him at QB3. I think that's a realistic possibility for him. But again, he's Patrick Mahomes, so I'm very A-okay with drafting him. Number 2, Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, dude, he might have won MVP last year. Or you could make the argument he should have. He was a guy we were really high on, and he hit because of the rushing, man. The rushing, again, we've talked about this multiple times, but it is king at quarterback. That's why I think if Trey Lance ends up starting this year, he's going to be a good value because of the rushing. He had 165 rushing attempts, which is a lot. 760 rushing yards and 13 rushing touchdowns, which is insane. Don't think that's going to happen again, but he only played 15 games, 13 rushing touchdowns. That's unreal. And he was very efficient and improved as a passer as well with the addition of A.J. Brown. You can't go wrong with Jalen Hurts. I think there's a real shot he's the QB1 this year, especially if he can play a full season. He's got the rushing. He's got the weapons. He's got everything. Everything you want. He's a great, great draft pick if you're going to take a quarterback high. I was really tempted to put him at number 1. But I don't know if he gets the 13 rushing touchdowns again, and then how much passing increase will he get this year? Is he going to throw 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns? I don't really think so. But if he does, he's QB1 for sure. And even if he does what he did last year, like close to 4,000 yards, 22, 23 touchdowns, he's a top three fantasy quarterback, most likely. Then number 1, I have Josh Allen. I do. A lot of people might disagree. Would I rather have Jalen Hurts? Would I rather have Patrick Mahomes? And I get it. I do. But we're looking at a guy who was the QB1 back-to-back seasons, which I said was super rare. And then last year, in arguably a down year, he was the QB2. I mean, like, he had 5 fumbles last year, 14 interceptions, a lot of turnovers. He was still the QB2. This dude is ridiculous. Fancy cheat code because he also has the rushing. But even more so than Jalen Hurts, he's got the passing. And he's a very good passer. He's a guy who could throw 4,500 yards and 35 touchdowns to go with the 700 rushing yards like Jalen Hurts. I mean, he has everything you want in a fantasy quarterback. If I'm going to take one at the top and I get my pick of the litter, I am taking Josh Allen. He's got everything you want. He checks all the boxes. He also stays healthy, which is, I don't want to jinx it, but feels like that's due for him. And because he's not only a runner, he's kind of a crazy runner. But 17 games played, 16. So he played full seasons. And then his rookie year, I want to say I don't know if he started week 1 as a rookie. I don't think he did. So he's been relatively healthy his entire career. Not even relatively. He has been healthy his entire career. So you're getting that. You get the passing. You get the rushing. He's a guy who's finished as a top 2 fantasy quarterback for 3 straight years. Give me Josh Allen all day, every day. So with that ends the long list of my top 10 quarterbacks and tight ends. A lot of guys we talked about, a lot of good players here. I think at both positions, you want to get some of the top 10 guys, which historically speaking, we have told you to wait on those positions, but I don't see a whole ton of value outside of it. Maybe more so for tight end. I'd still be okay with waiting on tight end. But for quarterback, I would much rather have one of these top 10, preferably top 9, and even more so preferably top 8 quarterbacks. I want one of those guys really bad on my team. So thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to check out our website at thefantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and we will talk to you later. See you guys.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.